Welcome into Seattle Seahawks today. I am your host, Tom Downey, here to break down some interesting free agency buzz around Seattle. Namely, could they sign another edge in free agency? This was floated by Fansided, who mentioned two names, the first of which is Justin Houston. And their idea was, you got to get more pass rush help. And I'll discuss the general mindset I have on that. But first, the players mentioned. Justin Houston. He's aging, but he is still productive. Houston, at this point in his NFL career, I don't know if he can ever be a full-time guy, but he can be a rotational piece for you, and that does intrigue me. As we'll get into more in depth in a little bit here, I do wonder if there are enough snaps for Justin Houston. The other name mentioned, we'll come back to Houston more in depth later, is Olivier Vernon, who, again, part of that Fansided article. My biggest red flag here for Vernon is he is immensely talented. He's a fantastic football player. But he's also coming off a torn Achilles. And with the timing of that, I wonder if A, he's going to be good to go for week one, and B, if at his age, he's going to recapture his old form. I don't know if that's going to be the case for Vernon. So we'll get to him as well, but more on Houston. The production this past year out of Justin Houston was awesome. 8 tackles for loss, 8 sacks. It is very understandable if you're a Seahawks fan, you're like, yeah, I'll take that. I want that guy on my roster, on my organization. He's going to help me. Same with Vernon. Both of these guys were very productive, but they are still available, Vernon because of injury, and because the NFL is ageist. They don't like old guys unless you're Urban Meyer and it's Tim Tebow. Like, they want young, cheaper players. They're very cheap and they're very ageist as well. So Vernon and Houston unquestionably are the top two guys, as far as I'm concerned, at least two of the top guys, I should say, out there on the open market. But I actually don't know if Seattle should go at a pass rusher. Before I give my thoughts here, get your votes in for me in the comments section. Should Seattle go get another pass rusher? Type 1 for yes, they should, or type in 0 for no, they should not. Now, in general, I don't think they need one. And yeah, you might be worried about the whole Aldon Smith stuff, and that's fine. But Seattle addressed the edge rushing position multiple times in this year's free agency cycle. They cut and then brought back Carlos Dunlap. They re-signed Benson Mayowa. They went out and they signed Kerry Hyder as well. And oh, by the way, they spent draft picks last year on Darrell Taylor and on Alton Robinson. So they picked up several guys. And oh, on top of that, they still have LJ Collier and Rasheem Green, who can play some inside-outside defensive end / defensive tackle. So when I look at this depth chart, and I go, well, you want Dunlap and Mayo and Hyder to play most of your snaps. You want to get Darrell Taylor out there as well. Alton Robinson's fine as a number 5 defenseman. Plus, you got Griffin and Collier out there too. I look at the edge rushing position for Seattle, and I go, well, this is not a need. So even though Houston and Vernon and others are good players, I don't feel the need to go sign somebody. If I'm Seattle, I'm looking elsewhere, and I'm passing on getting a veteran edge rusher right now. Let's talk Shaquem Griffin, as NFL Network reports that, multiple teams have expressed interest in signing Griffin. And I'm going to let you guys into some agent speak here. I don't think there's very much interest in Shaquem Griffin. I do wonder, though, if Seattle could bring him back. And, of course, spent plenty of time talking about KJ Wright here in Seattle. But let's also talk about Shaquem Griffin as well. Now, there was plenty of Jacksonville, ? Speculation when his twin brother signed with the Jags. But any interest in Shaquem Griffin is not going to be for a big role. Even though I loved him coming out of the NFL draft because of how fast he was, he hasn't done very much. That's the reality. Now, he's a good special team player, but look at his stats this past year. I mean, that's not multiple teams want to bring him in. Over his career, Shaquem Griffin has been, he's been okay. He's been a decent, back end of the roster guy. There's speed and special teams value. I actually don't mind the idea of any team going out and getting Shaquem Griffin. I think Seattle could use him in a better fashion. Maybe a new coaching staff at some point maximizes him better. But given where Seattle's at, I got no problems if they are one of the multiple teams, quote unquote, who have expressed interest in signing him. He's going to be cheap. He's not going to be guaranteed a roster spot either. So I do think Griffin could make some sense for Seattle as a cheap, let him compete for a roster spot type of move. So get your votes in for me. What do you guys want to do? Do you want to bring back Shaquem Griffin and split up the Twins? Get your votes in for me. Type Y for yes you do, or type in N for not really, I don't want to do it, I want to look elsewhere, which is fine, but get your votes in. Y for yes, N for no. Now, when I look at the Seahawks depth chart, we talked previously about how the edge rushing spot is so deep. The linebacker group is not. You have Cody Barton, who is currently, I think, the linebacker 3, Bobby Wagner, Jordan Brooks. Those are your top 2 guys. They'll play the most. And then Ben Burr-Kirvin's a depth guy. You brought in Nate Evans off of waivers. Aaron Donkor is going to be a practice squad guy. I don't know if Alton's going to make the team. John Radigan is maybe a special teamer. If Shaquem Griffin were to rejoin this organization, I think, depending on if you count Alden Smith or not, which I'm not going to, I think he'd be this team's 5th best linebacker. And that's not saying much because it's so thin, but I do think bringing Griffin back would provide depth for this organization. So at least like bottom of the roster depth. Now, if you were to go sign KJ Wright, okay, you don't need Shaquem Griffin at that point. But as a potential strong side linebacker, special teams value, all that stuff, I do think there is a role for Griffin on this roster, and I think that makes some sense for Seattle, so we'll see if they end up going this route or not. Let's talk DK Metcalf, who ran at the United States Track and Field Golden Games, his first ever professional track and field appearance, and he ran a pretty solid 10.73 second 100-meter dash, 10.37, my bad, 10.37 100-meter dash, which is unreal time for a 229-pound guy, but it was also 15th out of 17th overall, and he was last in his heat. And in the end, DK Metcalf looked like a football guy playing track. Normally, it's the opposite on this show. It's about track guys trying to play football. I was fairly impressed by how well DK Metcalf ran at his size. I think he should feel pretty good about it. Running that fast is very, very impressive. It is also worth mentioning that I'm not overly surprised by the end timing here for DK Metcalf. Like, he was never going to win. There was no way that a football player of DK Metcalf's size was going to show up and outrun professional track and field athletes. It was simply not going to happen. He was a good 2/10 of a second behind some of the higher qualifying runners. So, good job, DK Metcalf. Got some more hype for track and field, but in the end, I'm not surprised that he didn't do that great, 15th out of 17th in the end.